could not be more excited to welcome Amer Kaissi to the show today. I've been raving about your book, Humbitious Leadership, for months now. Welcome to the Empathy Edge.
Thank you, Maria. I'm so excited to be with you today.
And I'm so glad we connected many, many months ago. I think you were possibly just finishing writing the book or about to get it published. And I showed you a copy that I have with Post-it notes and dog ears all over it, but it is such an important book for this conversation, for this topic, for the kind of leadership that we need today, not just in organizations, but in government, in nonprofit, in social impact. And I love the fact that you bust, because I'm a huge myth buster myself. I love the fact that you bust one of the most common myths about leadership, that arrogant, overconfident people are better leaders. And the idea of humbitious, which we're going to get to actually what that word means, shatters that myth because research has shown that humility, when combined with ambition, can significantly improve your performance and the performance of your team and organization. So why don't we start there? Can you define humility for us?
Yeah, this concept of humility is so misunderstood. A lot of people, when they think of a humble person or a humble leader, maybe the idea of someone who is passive or someone who sits on the sidelines, someone who is not assertive, comes up to mind. And what I try to do in this book, by looking at the research and looking at a lot of other smart people, what they've said is that humility is not a weakness. In fact, humility is a strength, and it can be a superpower when combined with ambition. Now, humility itself comes from the Latin word that is spelled H-U-M-U-S, right? It's not hummus, it's humus.
It's not tasty hummus, yes.
No, it's not tasty hummus, that's Arabic. So humus is Latin. And actually, the way the Romans used that word is close to the ground or close to the earth, which I think is a very apt description within the concept of leadership, within the context of leadership, because a humble leader is someone who is close to the people that they are leading. A humble leader is also someone who doesn't underestimate their own abilities. So it's not about having some strength and saying, no, I'm not good at this. No, it's about looking at your abilities as accurately as possible. So if you have strengths, you acknowledge them. But if you have areas for improvement, you also are aware of them and you start working on them.
So humbitious as a term is your term for combining that humility and ambition. And by the way, so interesting, because in my research around empathy, I found that empathy combined with ambition were the success secrets for successful salespeople. And so I think it's important that we're not talking about one without the other. We're not talking about somebody, whether we're talking about empathy or humility, about a leader who is passive. We're still talking about, it's more, I love what you said about the Latin root, because it's almost about someone who's very grounded.
Absolutely. Someone who's grounded, close to the people that they're leading, but also someone who, as you said, still brings up that drive, that ambition. So I don't know if I've shared with you, Maria, before, but I, part of my work is also as an executive coach. So, some of the leaders I coach are too humble, but not ambitious enough. Right? We all know people like this. They're generous, they're other-centered, but they don't have the assertiveness. I mean, they get along well with everyone, but they don't get anything done.
Right.
Some of the other leaders I coach are too ambitious, but not humble enough. Now, that's a dangerous combination, right?
Right.
Because they do set bold visions and they want to execute them, but they don't involve anyone. And they don't listen to others' input. Unfortunately, they end up leaving a trail of damage everywhere they go.
Absolutely.
And they're not that effective either. So the research shows that we need to bring in both high humility and high ambition. Mm-hmm. And that's the only way we can have high performance in the long run as leaders.
So as you work with folks as an executive coach, what's the prescription for each of those two personality types? How do you go from being humble but not ambitious? How do you build up that ambition? And if you're the opposite, how do you build up that humility? Can you give us some examples, anonymous examples of folks that you've worked with and maybe the turnaround that you've seen?
Yeah. I mean, if we start with someone who is humble but not ambitious enough, I think we need to start with believing in yourself and believing in your team, and dealing with some of these imposter thoughts that may be coming to you, right? And I don't like to call it imposter syndrome. I like to call it imposter thoughts. And we can get into that if we have time. But I also talk about, I advise them to start speaking up in meetings, start becoming a little bit more assertive. Don't sit on the sidelines when there is an important discussion. Don't be passive. And start practicing doing some of these things first in low stakes situations so that you can do them in high stakes situations later on once you've mastered them. And as you notice, as we're talking about speaking up and being assertive and not delaying difficult conversations, I mean, none of these practices goes against humility. You can still be humble and implement some of these ambitious practices.
Completely. And I think we can all think of leaders, successful leaders that we've worked for or had the privilege of knowing that meet that criteria. I mean, we can look at, regardless of your political persuasion, we can look at Barack Obama. We can look at, Steven Spielberg. We can look at other people that are completely winners in their fields. And yet it's not about, they're not, let's just be honest, they're not Elon Musk. They're not,
since you went with the political leaders, may I offer an example of someone who's not in the US?
Yes. And I love her. I know who you're going to talk about, and I love her. Please.
We all do love her. This is a leader that I've been following for a while now, and she may not be very well known in the US, but she's well known all over the world. And it's Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. When she became Prime Minister in 2017, she was the youngest female leader in the world. And typically when there is a young leader, a young female leader, there's doubts and skepticism from the people who are already there. And in her case, they were like wondering, okay, is she all, does she have any is she able to deal with the challenges? Mm-hmm. And the challenges came at her thick and fast. Within a couple of years of her administration, if you recall, there was a terrorist who walked into two places of worship in the town of Christchurch in New Zealand and killed 55 innocent people. Now, people were looking to her reaction to see what kind of reaction it's going to be. And at first, it was all humility, all empathy, right? So she first showed up for the families of the victims. She went to their living rooms. She sat with them. She listened to them. She cried with them. She mourned with them. But she did it all in private, not in a way to get attention for herself. Mm-hmm. 2 weeks later, after that mourning period was over, it was all ambition. It was all decisiveness. She went to Parliament and she forced them to pass gun control laws that had been dragging on for a couple years in New Zealand. Within a couple of weeks, that law, policy became a law. Mm-hmm. And I love that combination of how she's able to bring both, the humility and the ambition, the empathy and the decisiveness. And this is something that she's talked about openly before. And she said, I refuse to believe that you cannot be compassionate and strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she is amazing. And so how do you work with those folks that are over-indexed on the ambition, but not the humility? What are you advising them to work on?
With the ones that are lacking on the humility, I believe the first starting point should be the self-awareness, right? Do they realize how they're coming across to others? Do they understand that some of the things that they believe are strengths are not really their strengths? So we start by having them reflect a little bit on their strengths and weaknesses, but most importantly, we have them seek feedback, which can come in many forms, but most prevalently in the form of a 360-degree feedback, where you ask your boss, your colleagues, and your subordinates to tell you how you're coming across as a leader. Mm-hmm. And sometimes these types of leaders are not aware of their lack of humility. Some of them are, but some of them are not. And that self-awareness is the first step in their development and progress journey. Now, once they get that feedback, then we start honing in, okay, what is it specifically that they need to work on? Is it the empathy part? Is it the emotional self-awareness? Is it the impulse control? Is it the assertiveness? What is it that they need to work on? And then we put a plan to tackle that.
And you had some great self-reflection questions in your book that, especially when, we're often taught as leaders to reflect on, when things went well or when we had big successes and when things didn't go so well, but we never take that next step on the successes to give us confidence that we contributed to that success, and also realize that we're not the only ones that contributed to that success. So you have some great self-reflection questions, such as who trained and mentored me? Who schedules my meetings and manages my calendar? How many people on my team and in my organization are doing a great job? How did luck and market conditions contribute to my success? Is that kind of eye-opening for your clients when you force them to ask these questions versus just think about a time when you were successful?
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, about the grounding part. These are the questions that keep you grounded, right? You've just gotten a promotion, you've just gotten, an award at work, or maybe just a pat on the back from the boss. Many of us in those situations will have a tendency to think, oh, I'm succeeding because I'm so awesome, right? Because I've worked so hard, and that's okay. We need to acknowledge that, and we need to celebrate our achievements and our successes. But we also need to engage in some honest self-reflection and really ask ourselves those questions.
And you have a great quote here. The core feature of humility then is not downplaying your strengths, but rather not believing that you should be treated differently because of them. A trait that researchers called hypoegoic non-entitlement. So I do love that, because I think that's the groundedness. That's the balance of, yes, I can celebrate my successes and I can be confident in my skills and my talents and know that I didn't get there alone.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that term, academics, we like to make up big, complicated terms and use them in academic parties. But the point is, as we said, it's really not about underestimating our abilities. That would be fake humility. And fake humility is fake, right? So it is not, if and everyone knows that you are a subject matter expert in strategy, that's okay. You can say, I'm a subject matter expert in strategy. Now, I'm not the only one who knows about strategy. I'm not the smartest person in the world about strategy, right? And I'm not a subject matter expert on a lot of other things. So it's really about just accurately estimating what we're good at and what we're not good at.
Absolutely. It's that whole idea of otherwise it's humble bragging, they call it, right?
Yep.
And so, that first step is your relationship with yourself, and, same thing with empathy and quite frankly, many of these emotional intelligence skills. It's got to start at home. It's got to start at home base, right? It's not about necessarily what's going on out there. It's what's going on inside. But then it's also about basing it on our relationships with others. And so can you talk a little bit about that? So as we start to move into figuring out how open-minded we are to other ideas, or how much we appreciate other people, or how generous we are, that has to happen after the inner work. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're describing here, Maria, is, when I looked at the research, it showed that progression of building that humility has to start first with the self, right? So the first building block, if you may, in humility is our relationships with ourselves. And we talked about the self-awareness. We talked about the self-reflection. And then we start thinking about how we treat others and whether we listen to them, whether we change our minds when there's new evidence, whether we admit our mistakes, whether we say, I don't know, but I will find out, right? All of these are aspects of open-mindedness. And then we get to aspects of gratitude and appreciation of others, right? You have formed a great team around you. Do you show your appreciation to them? Do you tell them, like Ted Lasso does, I appreciate you, right? Do you write them handwritten thank you notes? So all of that is how we relate to the people that we're working with, and that would form the second building block of humility.
I love it so much. I want to briefly just backtrack a little bit, because this concept is more about the awareness of self. Can you talk to us about the illusion of knowledge and how many leaders suffer from it?
Yeah, that illusion of knowledge is unfortunately something that every human being suffers from. We all think that we know more than we actually do. And it could be about trivial stuff. I mentioned this in the book. They did this study where they asked people to rate on a scale from 1 to 10. How much do they think they know how a zipper works? Something as trivial as that, right? And initially, most people said 9 or 10. Of course, I know how a zipper works. I use it every day, right? And then after they did that, they asked them, okay, well, now describe to us how a zipper actually works step by step. And most people have no clue, right? So then they went back and they said, okay, now that we've asked you, now tell us how much knowledge do you have on how a zipper works? And now people said 1 or 2 over 10, right? So from very trivial issues like how a zipper works to more important stuff, such as, the war in Ukraine,
right? Climate change, right?
Climate change, vaccines, stuff like that. Most people claim to know more than they actually do. Now, that's all well and fine, except if you're a leader. If you're a leader and your confidence is much higher than your competence, that's going to be a problem, because you're going to come across as arrogant and you're not going to be listening to other people. You're going to go into every conversation thinking that you have a monopoly over the truth, that you already know. And that's why you see many of these leaders, and I've coached many of them, who would go into their staff meetings and they would have just a long monologue and not allow anyone to speak up or push back or ask questions. So that's the main danger of that illusion of knowledge, is when we think we know everything about everything and we don't allow others to bring in their expertise.
Well, and I love that, because, and I want to get to if you see a gender difference in that at all. But before we go there, I want to talk about this study that was done with students in a management course at the University of Washington. They were part of an experiment, and they discovered that humility was more strongly associated with getting a good grade than all the other factors measured in the study. So can you talk to us about that study and why, whether it was like if they were going to study more, they were going to get extra help, why was humility the key in being able to predict if they were going to improve their scores over time?
Yeah. So let's simplify this study. Let's assume that we have 2 students taking the same course and coming in with the same level of intelligence, because the researchers controlled for that. So let's call them, Alexa and Donald. Okay. So let's say, Alexa and Donald are taking the course. They have the same IQ. Now, let's say both of them scored C on the midterm, right? Not the grade that they wanted to get. This research shows that if Alexa is more humble than Donald, as rated by her classmates, again, it's not a self-reporting thing, it's as rated by others. So if Alexa is more humble, chances are she is going to get a better grade on the final than Donald. And the reason for that is because of her humility, then Alexa is better able to estimate her abilities accurately, to know how much she already knows and how much work is left to be done till the final, right? So that's what we were talking about earlier. Not only that, but because of her humility, she can notice who in the class is already doing well and maybe go and talk to them and learn from them, observe what they're doing, what are their studying habits. So she is open-minded to change her practices and to start doing something different. Whereas Donald, who's less humble, probably will not engage in that thing, will be more close-minded and say, no, I'm going to stick to my way. And that's why he's not likely to improve his grade over time. So that research showed that, that the researchers looked at a lot of different things, including self-esteem and intelligence and a lot of other psychological traits. And of all of these things, it was humility that mostly predicted whether a student improved their grade from the midterm to the final. Now, if we look at it at a more macro view, what this tells us is that there is a connection between humility and resilience, right?
And adaptability.
And adaptability, absolutely,
Yeah.
because what is getting over a setback and doing better on the final than on midterm, that it is mostly that adaptability, that ability to be resilient and to overcome a challenge and come back stronger on the other end.
I love that, because again, you can think of that in a leadership setting of, if you as a leader, or any leader, has a challenge or has a failure, they might try to find excuses for why it's somebody else's fault, or we were having a bad day, or we didn't have enough budget, or this, that, and the other thing, versus being humble enough to go, here's the part I may have played in this. How can I learn and move forward? And possibly, how can I learn from someone else and admit that someone else might be able to help me through this?
Yeah, absolutely. And if we want to connect this point, Maria, to a point that we made about 10 minutes ago, we had talked about humility after success. Now we're talking about humility after failure.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And you can see the importance of humility in all of these situations.
Absolutely. So now I do want to get to, is there a gender difference? Is there, and I always get this question with empathy too. And I always say, well, it depends on, you can find a study to support your point of view. But I was like, from my own personal experience, some of my most empathetic managers have been men, and some of my most unempathetic managers have been women. So I always say, ladies, we don't have a lock on this, right? So is there anything around being a Humbitious leader? Is there any finding around women have the capability for being a Humbitious leader a little bit more than men? Is there no gender difference? Do you prefer not to even talk about a gender difference?
No, I think we need to acknowledge the gender issue, because it's part of reality. I'm going to try to summarize 20 years of research in 1 minute. Okay.
Awesome.
And overgeneralize, grossly overgeneralize.
Yes.
And say, in general, and each one of us is going to find an exception to what I'm going to say, but in general, if we look at female leaders, we're going to see that humility comes to them more easily than ambition. If we look at male leaders, it's going to be the opposite. Ambition comes to them more easily than humility. Now, again, this is a very general statement, and I'm sure all of us have worked with female leaders who were very ambitious and with male leaders who were very humble. The other point that I would add there is, in some situations and in some organizations, it's really an unfair situation for female leaders, because on the one hand, they're expected to be more humble, right? It's an expectation.
It's a cultural expectation. Yeah,
exactly. To be nurturing and empathetic. I'm doing air quotes here, and humble and all of that. But if you ask anyone who works in those organizations, what is your view of a leader? They say, oh, it's got to be someone with a type A personality, my way or the highway. So there is a gap between expectations of a female and expectations of a leader. And that creates unfair situations. And that creates situations where many of the women in that organizations don't get the chances and the opportunities that they deserve.
Absolutely. And I think because they do, a lot of places still do see humility as a weakness and not a strength. And that's why your book is so important, because it talks about the fact that actually that humility is the superpower, and it leads to better outcomes. It leads to more success. Again, when it's combined with ambition, right? So it was the same thing with the study on sales people and their success. You couldn't just be a successful salesperson if you were high in empathy. You still had to have drive to close deals and work deals and chase leads. And so you still had to have, you couldn't just be the empathetic person and sales were going to magically close. Right. So I think that's an important point, is no one's saying this is binary. No one's saying it's an either or, it's an and, which is why I love the name of your book so much, Humbitious. So, Are there any final nuggets you can share? If someone's listening to this, a leader is listening to this, and they feel they need to work on their humility, or like we were talking about earlier, they're the person that is a little bit tends towards more humility and less decisiveness, less action. What are some just actionable steps they can take to get going? It's not going to be solved overnight, but what are some
Sure.
actionable steps they can take to get going?
Sure. I'm going to share two practices, one for the one who needs to work on their humility and one for the ones who need to work on their ambition.
Mm-hmm.
For the ones who need to work on their humility, I would say a very important skill is how we listen. And you're the expert on that because you've talked about it within the context of empathy, right? It's, most of us are bad listeners. Let's just acknowledge that. We
100%.
think we are. We think we are, but we're not. And the reason for that, in my opinion, I think, and I've observed that in leaders, is that most leadership development programs will focus on good communication skills and public speaking skills, but not on listening skills. We're producing leaders that are great talkers, but that are horrible listeners. So I would say for the person who wants to work on their humility, start with listening and make sure that you're listening to understand versus listening to reply.
Yes.
Because there's a big difference between the two. For the person who already has some of that humility, but is working on their ambition, my suggestion would be work on having difficult conversations. Prepare yourself and practice how to have these difficult conversations in an effective way. Don't avoid, don't delay, don't dread these difficult conversations because you're going to have them. I read a quote the other day, and I don't know who it was that says it, that your success in life is going to be directly proportional to the amount of difficult conversations that you're willing to have. And I believe in that. We all have to have these difficult conversations. So in terms of dialing up the ambition, is what are the skills that you need and what is the confidence that you need so you can sit across the table from someone, and let's say it's one of your direct reports, and tell them your performance is not up to standards. These, if this doesn't change, these are going to be the consequences. Or talk to your boss and say, I deserve this opportunity. You need to give me this opportunity, and these are the reasons. So that would be the one practice that I find is lacking in the people who don't have the ambition. And honestly, Maria, I believe difficult conversations should be a skill that is taught at high school. How to have these difficult conversations. I've worked, I've shared it with my own kids. I have a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old. And I tell them, you need to get better at having difficult conversations, especially with figures of authority.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the most important things, is getting comfortable with discomfort and not turning it into rage, not turning it into spite, not turning it into fear, but being completely confident in, wow, this is a really uncomfortable conversation we're having right now. How are we going to move forward out of it? And whether it's, like you said, whether it's a performance review or it's a heated budget debate or it's, a personal matter in the workplace or even in your life, it's being able to get comfortable with that discomfort and know that it's going to be okay. You don't have to lose your mind in the midst of a difficult conversation. And that's where, I'm sure you deal with this too. The secret to all of this is that in order to be empathetic, in order to be humble, it does require confidence, not overconfidence, but confidence, because then you can make space for someone else without defensiveness, without fear, without, protecting your turf. And so it's that it's not talked about enough that these, when people want to dismiss these skills like humility and empathy as weak and soft, it actually requires an immense amount of self-confidence and self-presence.
Absolutely. You said it very, very elegantly. And I would say the flip side of that, we see the people with the big egos, the narcissists, most often that comes from insecurities.
Completely. It's the bully's always insecure, right? So Well, Amer, I am so excited that we finally got to have this conversation and that you wrote this book. It's brilliant. And I hope everyone will pick it up. It's called Humbitious: The Power of Low Ego, High Drive Leadership. There is a better way to be a leader, and this book is key. So, we're going to have all your links in the show notes, including a link to the book. But just real quickly for folks on the go, where is the best way for them to find out more about you and your work?
People can find about me on my website at amerkaissi.com, as well as on LinkedIn. And then they can check out the book in online retailers where they normally get their books from.
Great. And that is AmerKaissi. Amer, thank you so much for your time and your insight today. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. And it was a lot of fun. And I'm glad we finally got to do this.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of the Empathy Edge podcast. As always, please refer a friend, refer a colleague, and don't forget to rate and review and let us know what you think. Until next episode, please remember that cash flow, creativity, and compassion are not mutually exclusive. Take care and be kind.